Well, I'll respect the chair, and thank you, Mr. Lynch. Thank you, Mr. Hill, for your leadership. It is my hope that this task force we can build some consensus around financial technology. This is a non-ideological space and otherwise highly polarized Washington. And I think it shows that we can use technology to get better societal outcomes. Well, the same or better societal outcomes that we seek in current law. We have very important provisions of law that have been put in place through a massive amount of work to ensure that we don't discriminate against people based off of what I would describe as superficial reasons, right? And that work, where you're located, what you look like, who your parents were, any of that stuff, right? And what we see now in China is that you have a social score as well, right? And it's political connections and all this stuff. And I hear this underlying the whole panel. We don't want that. Just because you're tweeting, you're a jerk on Twitter doesn't mean you're uncreditworthy. Or if you follow, nuts on the left or the right on Twitter should not make you more or less creditworthy. So getting into the fundamentals of this, how we use alternative data. Mr. Gerard, you brought this up. Let's talk about the sandbox approach that Mr. Hill brought up in his question. The question of innovation and financial inclusion, I think, should go hand in hand. What are the benefits of a sandbox approach, Mr. Gerard, in your view?
As someone who's gone through the process we did over 4 years, frankly, with CFPB, the sandbox isn't to our advantage. We already walked the walk and walked over the coals. But honestly, in the interest of the American consumer, you want a robust environment where not just small companies, but the largest banks have an opportunity to innovate in modeling and in credit decisioning, because it can only benefit the consumer. A sandbox is necessary because, let me just give you an example. In the very early days of our lending, I met with the CEO of one of the top banks in the country, one of the largest card issuers in the country, and his words to me were, I love what you're doing, I'm really glad you're doing it, because we'll never be able to do that. And I think, honestly, it may be to my business advantage that that's the case, but it's not to the American consumer's advantage. We need innovation across the industry, not just in unsecured personal loans, but in mortgages, in auto lending, in HELOCs, in all flavors of credit.
So what would the benefit be if you use alternative data and somebody has, under a traditional score, less than A+ credit, right? But you see through alternative data that they actually pay their rent, they pay their cell phone bill, and they have never missed those payments. It enhances that credit score, right? Others, it would actually say that that credit score is not as good because they're not paying or they continue to have issues. So there's this picking and choosing when you say, well, we only want to use good stuff if it's alternative data. Well, that's not representative that everyone is a good credit risk, right? So how do you prove that out in terms of ensuring it's not discriminatory based off of our traditional metrics under federal law?
Let me just say the important background is that FICO and income, which are the two anchors of almost any lender, are terribly biased. And they are so biased that the additional of alternative data, whether that's education, whether that's the name of the company you work for, a variety of other things, actually reduce the bias in the credit decisioning because the baseline is so biased itself. So that is why it represents such an opportunity. The other really important point...
Across the panel, anybody disagree with that statement?
I would add something.
No, but any disagreement with the contents in the last 5 sentences of what Mr. Gerard said? Anyone on the panel?
There is bias certainly in the existing data, right? Because it's the result of systemic, we just talk about data collection for algorithms generally. We have to acknowledge that at the outset, the data that is being collected is biased. One of the best and easiest, most accessible examples would be in criminal law enforcement, right? To the extent that an area is over-policed by police in a particular city or area, there will be more arrests in that area.
No, but I'm talking about consumer credit, and I'm talking about the specifics of this. That is a larger societal issue. We're the Financial Services Committee and not the Judiciary Committee. So that is a major issue. I certainly understand that, and I appreciate that. But let's talk about what we're going to fix here in the Financial Services Committee. When you say that alternative data can be an enhancement, and I understand all the caveats that all of you in a very lawyerly sort of way, if I would say, yes, it has great opportunities, but there are risks. Of course there are, right? But when we're talking about getting unbanked or credit invisible people and making them visible, that is I think that is a proper, is a proper societal trade-off in order to get more people into the world of being banked rather than underbanked or unbanked. And so I appreciate the hearing, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.